Hugo Pepper, A Far-Flung Adventure. The Snow Giant's Gift. Once upon a time, there were two reindeer herders called Harvey and Sarvi Runtertuntun. Harvey was tall and bony, Sarvi was short and round. Both of them had beady eyes, snub noses, and long hair, which they tied up and kept hidden beneath their three-pointed reindeer herder hats. They loved each other dearly, and though they were not blessed with children, they were happy and healthy and counted themselves the luckiest reindeer herders in the whole wide world. They lived in a little cabin deep in the ice forests of the frozen north, where the summers are short and the winters are very, very long. Every summer, Harvey and Sarvi milked their reindeer beneath the midnight sun. Then, as the days drew short and the nights grew long, they would return to their cabin in the ice forests. There, all through the long winter, beneath the ice moon, they made reindeer cheese, the finest in the whole of the frozen north. People came from far and wide just to taste their moose milk mozzarella and elk gorgonzola, while their famous red-nosed brie was once served to no less a person than Queen Rita at the fabulous banquet aboard the SS Euphonia. If they had wanted to, Harvey and Sarvi could have sold every truckle of reindeer cheese they produced, but they didn't, and this is the reason why. Although they were famous cheesemakers, the Runtertuntuns were simple reindeer herders at heart and were always careful to observe the ways of the frozen north. One of these ways was to save a single truckle from every batch of cheese and leave it outside the cabin door last thing before going to bed. This was to keep the snow giants who lived in the ice forests happy. Neither Harvey or Sarvi had ever actually seen a snow giant, but they knew they existed because they'd seen their giant footprints in the snow. These footprints were huge, as wide as a milk pail and with 3 long toes splayed out at the front of each massive foot. So, as every reindeer herder knew, it made sense to keep such fearsome creatures happy. Each night, the Runtertuntuns left the cheese outside, and each morning there would be cheese crumbs on the cabin doorstep and huge footprints which led off into the forest of ice. Sometimes the snow giants would leave little presents of their own, like sprigs of icicle trees or a frozen fir cone or two. As the wolves howled at the moon and the hungry polar bears prowled in the distance, Harvey and Sarvi felt protected by their snow giants. Along with the sprigs and fir cones, the Runtertuntuns believed that the snow giants also brought them luck. Then, one dark snowy night, the snow giants brought Harvey and Sarvi something else. When Sarvi opened the door to their cabin and looked down, expecting to see cheese crumbs and a frozen fir cone or two, she found herself looking into 2 bright, twinkling blue eyes. She gave a high-pitched squeak of surprise, because there on the doorstep in the early light of dawn was a little baby, wrapped up tightly in a blanket. She knelt down, scooped the baby up in her arms and hugged it tightly. It gurgled contentedly. She turned and rushed back inside, calling excitedly to her husband, "Harvey, Harvey, wake up! Look what the snow giants have brought us!" Now the Runtertuntuns might have been simple reindeer herders at heart, but they knew that where there was a baby, there had to be parents somewhere close by. So Harvey put on his snowshoes, packed up a reindeer, and set off to search the ice forests. It was late afternoon, with the low sun casting long shadows, when he stumbled across it. A strange sled, overturned, half-draped in a sheet of silk, and covered in polar bear claw marks. Next to it was all that was left of the baby's parents: a gentleman's boot and a lady's glove. There were polar bear tracks and snow giant footprints in the snow and the telltale signs of a mighty struggle. Harvey rolled up the silk sheet and turned the sled back over. Then, along with the gentleman's boot and the lady's glove, he stashed the sheet behind the seat, hitched the sled to his reindeer, and towed it back to the cabin. There he stored it carefully at the back of the milking shed, and went inside to tell Sarvi the sad news. And it was sad news. But deep down, both Harvey and Sarvi were also happy, because now they had a little boy to call their own. His real parents may have been eaten by polar bears, But the snow giants had saved the baby and brought him to the Runtertuntons, and they felt proud and honoured to have been chosen for the special task of raising the infant. They also felt a little bit guilty, because although they loved the little baby and looked after him as if he was their own, teaching him about reindeer herding and cheese-making and the ways of the frozen north, and even called him by the names stitched into the back of the cardigan they found him in, there was one thing they didn't do. They didn't try to find out where he came from. Harvey and Sarvi knew they should have, but they were just simple reindeer herders, and they were frightened of losing their little boy. So when people arrived from far-flung places to buy their cheese, the Runtertuntons didn't ask or answer any questions. They simply smiled and nodded and wrapped up the truckles to keep them fresh, and always made sure that there was one left over for the snow giants. And the years passed. Then, one day, 10.5 years later, the boy didn't come in from milking. When Harvey went to the milking shed, he found him at the very back, behind the woodpile, staring at the battered sled that had lain there for all those years. He was holding a lady's glove in one hand and a gentleman's boot in the other. Chapter 1. You mustn't worry, Cuthbert. Nobody will ever find out your little secret. After all, who's going to say anything? There must be lots of others with your problem, and they probably manage perfectly well. Everything will be fine, trust me. But just to set your mind at rest, here are a few tips that may prove helpful. A heavy fog lay over the streets and alleyways of Harbour Heights, muffling the sounds and obscuring the sights of the town. In the distance, the mournful boom of the foghorn at Mermaid Cove could just be heard, while down by the harbour, the old disused lighthouse at Cyclops Point had all but disappeared in the grey haze. In the lower town, the shops along Archduke Ferdinand Boulevard were closing early, and a trickle of theatre-goers was coming out of the matinee performance of Vedran Follies at the Archduke Ferdinand Theatre. In the upper town, there was an eerie quiet in the large elegant squares and spacious gardens of the Heights, most people preferring to stay indoors rather than walk the gloomy streets. Anyone venturing out on that foggy evening would have found Montmorency Square deserted, and not a soul to be seen on Clifftop Row. Turning right and climbing the 300 steps of Sleeping Horse Lane, they would also have found themselves completely alone. But by turning left at the top of the steps into a forgotten little square far from the usual hustle and bustle of Harbour Heights, they would have encountered a curious figure looming out of the fog. Tall and thin and dressed in a shabby grey coat and a stovepipe hat, the old man tapped his way slowly round the little square, a long pole clasped in his gnarled hand. Pausing beneath a tall, fluted lamp-post, the old man raised the pole, gently unlatched the door of the lamp, and pulled it open. Then he pressed gently down on the nozzle inside the tip of the pole. There was a click, followed by a soft hiss, as the gas began to flow. Taking a taper from the brim of the tall hat, the lamplighter lit it with a flick of his thumb and placed it in the holder on the end of the pole. Slowly and carefully he raised the glowing pole and held it over the nozzle inside the lamp. There was a muffled pop, followed by a flash of blue, which became a soft yellow light as the mantle began to glow. The lamplighter pushed the glass door shut, the golden light gleaming on the beads of mist that encrusted his thick, droopy moustache, and moved on, tap, 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 to the next lamp-post. Behind him, a trail of soft yellow lights twinkled out of the fog, and, as if in answer, something remarkable happened. The untidy tangle of trees, shrubs, and bushes of the garden in the middle of the square began to shimmer and twinkle. By the time the old lamplighter had lit the last lamp and tapped his way back down Sleeping Horse Lane, the gardens were alive with thousands of dancing, shimmering fireflies. It was a magical sight, even on that gloomy evening, or at least it would have been if there was anyone around to see it. Just then, out of the fog, there came a strange stuttering sound, soft at first, but growing louder with every passing second. Phut, phut, splutter, splutter, phut. It seemed to be coming from high up above the square, the sound of a little engine spluttering, backfiring, fut, fut, bang, fut. Just as it seemed to be directly over the gardens with their shimmering, twinkling fireflies, the engine cut out, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then, suddenly, there came a whistling whoosh as something heavy fell from the sky. It crashed into a tall tree in the corner of the gardens with a loud clang and the sound of splintering branches. With screeches of dismay, a dozen scruffy yellow cats shot out of the surrounding bushes and dashed off into the fog in the direction of Sleeping Horse Lane as a large silk balloon tumbled gracefully from the sky and crumpled over a splintered branch with a sigh. It was quiet for a moment. Then, accompanied by a soft rustling noise, the tree began to shake. Suddenly, a small bundle dropped from its branches and fell into a shower of leaves and fireflies. As it reached the ground, the bundle hovered momentarily, then seemed to unfurl like a flower opening its petals before settling gently on the damp earth. In the middle of the blanket, curled into a tight ball, was the figure of a small boy. He was dressed in the distinctive costume of a reindeer herder from the frozen north, with an embroidered sweater, a three-pointed hat, and thick mittens. He climbed unsteadily to his feet and peered up at the tree, then down at the worn blanket on which he was standing. Kneeling down, he gently rolled the blanket up, put it under one arm, and stumbled out of the garden on wobbly legs, straight into the path of two old ladies who had just come out of Sleeping Horse Lane. They were tall, thin, and elegantly dressed in long flowing skirts that reached to the ground. Both had luxuriant bronze-coloured hair done up in elaborate coils and buns, and each wore large green-tinted spectacles through which they peered at the boy. "Good evening, young man," said the first old lady. "Are you quite all right?" said the second old lady, peering at the boy's face, which was deathly white. I haven't eaten for days," the boy began, swaying on his feet. "The cheese ran out. I'd no idea it was this far from the frozen north." "Cheese?" said the first old lady, putting down the lump of driftwood she was carrying. "Frozen north?" said the second old lady, setting down the large seashell she had under her arm. In front of them the garden shimmered in the thinning fog. Where is this?" the boy asked unsteadily. "Why," the old ladies beamed at him through their green-tinted spectacles. "Firefly Square, of course." But the boy didn't hear them, for he had fainted clean away.
Shoulder bone shake hold and take hold. Somebody should take you home.